And we know that the young people that we've worked with to date have now becoming teachers and civil servants and doctors and lawyers and campaigners, etc. And if we can harness their power as role models, that will have a profound effect on the landscape of social mobility for the better. And the independent sector will have played a really important part in that.
Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Thinking and acting strategically is the key to both securing the future of your school and helping to build a more equal and just world. My name's Juliette Corbett. I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator specialising in helping independent schools. In this podcast, I translate tried and tested strategy and fundraising techniques into a language that works for schools. So if you're a senior leader in a private school and you want your daily work to feel less exhausting and more strategic, and if you want once more to feel the joy of making the world a better place through education, then you're in the right place. Welcome, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello, and I am really thrilled this week to be joined on the podcast by Ali Henderson, CEO of the Royal National Children's SpringBoard Foundation, also known as RNCSF. RNCSF works to bring the transformational opportunities offered by the UK's leading schools to the young people who will benefit from them the most. By 2025, they aim to have supported 2,000 young people from challenging circumstances to access these opportunities, changing their futures, influencing their peers and becoming role models to others. So far, they've been working with 140 independent and boarding schools, and they've supported just under 1,000 pupils to date to attend leading schools on fully funded bursaries. So a little bit about Ali before we jump into the interview. So Ali was appointed as CEO of the Royal National SpringBoard Foundation in March 2020, and she has over 15 years' experience of leading programmes and policies to address social inequality, having worked across central and local government in policy, programme management, and as private secretary to the Prime Ministers Blair and Brown here in the UK. Ali worked for Oxfam in a strategic policy role prior to joining RNCSF to lead their approach to impact and learning. So she has a real depth of understanding and knowledge about this interface between the charities and policy making world and the world of independent education. Before we dive into the detail, I wanted to let you know about a free resource I've created to help you prepare your school for the coming economic impact of the invasion of Ukraine. It's a checklist of things you need to think about and take action on now, and it's designed to prompt strategic conversations around the issues that actually matter. You can download your free copy at www.consultjuliette.co.uk/checklist. Okay, now let's continue with this week's episode. So let's dive into my conversation today with Ali Henderson. So hi Ali, and welcome to the Independent School Podcast.
Thanks, Juliette. It's great to be here.
So you've obviously come through not this traditional kind of schools background. I'm fascinated to know what is the root of your commitment to broadening access and education? It's through social mobility, isn't it? And is there a reason that you've now decided to forge a career within the education sector specifically?
Yes, I mean, throughout my career to date, I've always been really interested in how to build fairness in an unequal world. And as you say, I started as a civil servant, where for 10 years I was able to learn so much about how to make change happen at a strategic level. But I had always wanted to move into the charity sector. That had always been a hope of mine. And I've lived and loved boarding schools throughout that time as someone married to a boarding school teacher. So I've been steeped in a love of what those communities have to offer. And when the chance rose to lead RNCSF, I jumped at it, because it's a charity I've known well, actually, since its very first beginnings. I've met many springboarders in all of the schools that I've lived in. And I just have seen it firsthand what a powerful impact they can have on those school communities. So it was a dream for me to be able to lead the charity when that came up in 2020.
So great that it combines your kind of commitment to social mobility and being in the charity sector, and combining it with that educational passion. That's great.
Yeah, no, I mean, as I say, I've been living in boarding school communities, but I've always at first hand seen just the power of a great education and what that can have. So yeah.
Fantastic. So many of the people listening will already know, but could you explain to us briefly the main roles of what the Royal National Children's Springboard Foundation does?
Yeah, of course. We're a charity, as you know, and we offer schools across the UK the infrastructure to help identify, prepare and support children who have faced really complex home circumstances to both secure and then successfully thrive in fully funded transformational bursary schemes. And over the last 10 years, we've built a network of schools, and currently work with 140 independent boarding schools. They're predominantly boarding schools because of our origins, but from this year, we've extended our offer to support day schools as well.
Fantastic. And I know that a lot of the work you do looks at impact as well. So making sure that the ways that you're helping these young people actually is genuinely felt as a lifelong enhancement of their opportunities.
Yeah, that's right. So we, at our core, we believe in that, the sort of power of working in partnership with organisations at a community level who can identify those young people facing the greatest risks and be able then to use them as a collective movement of young people who've all had access to bursary opportunities. Because of that collective effort, we've supported just shy of 1,000 young people in the last 10-year period, and we call those young people springboarders. So those 1,000 springboarders give us a really not only have they had a really transformative journey, but we've also now got, therefore, a sample size that can start to demonstrate the power of bursaries and how not only the opportunity within the school helps to transform their outcomes, and we've got some really good impact and outcome data on academic achievements, but more so on the kind of softer skills, on the kind of broader character development that those schools can allow young people to develop. And lastly, on the ripple effect that they can have on school communities as vibrant representations of a more diverse set of communities, and also on the ripple effect they can have on their home communities. So our impact framework is really important to how we work, and we hope it also helps our participating schools in their endeavours to fundraise for those bursaries.
Yeah, I think it's that combination that every child can have a unique experience at one of the schools that really suits them, but you as an organisation have the scale to be finding the right people that can really benefit and supporting them in a way that alongside a cohort of alumni, and then looking at the impact. There's a really powerful combination, isn't there, of the scale that you can bring while keeping it individually tailored to each child.
Yes, that's right. I mean, we've, at our core to our values are a whole child-centered approach. So each individual child, what is the right school for that child? And the only way that we can do that is by having so many participating schools. We are indebted to over 140 schools who are prepared every year to set aside 1, 2, 3 places. And that means that we can carefully match the right child to the right school. But do so in a way that those children all have others from their home community that they can connect with, connect back to in the holidays, who are all having similar, perhaps in different schools, but very similar experiences through their boarding school or now day school bursary journeys.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I think there's in a way this also enables the schools to follow morally what they want to be doing. I know a lot of school heads that I talk to and chairs of governors, they really want to be doing more in this area, but it's quite overwhelming sometimes for them to do it completely solo. So to partner with yourselves, I guess that takes some of the burden off them and allows the sector as a whole to ramp up kind of the provision in this area a little bit more quickly than it might be possible otherwise. Have you had conversations where you've got a sense that it's helping the schools to actually achieve their social mission as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so very few schools can build an infrastructure to really carefully identify young people who wouldn't necessarily apply for their bursary schemes, but who are those that for whom it would be the most transformative opportunity. And so what many schools will say is, by working in partnership with us, they don't need to build that infrastructure. They've, in effect, kind of outsourced that to us. And that power of the partnerships at community level means that the partners that we work with have known now, for some of them for as many as 10 years, the kind of attributes that a young person might need to present with to be able to access and thrive in a bursary opportunity. So they're going out and purposefully trying to seek to find those young people who are facing risks, but also who are really suitable and will throw themselves into all that the opportunity has to offer. I mean, the other part of what you've just said, I think, is absolutely keenly felt by us. There's been a real trend in recent years towards schools very actively seeking ways to open access to their communities. There's been a real drive by all school leaders I speak to try to build diverse pupil roles, the importance of that diversity, not just of background, but actually of thought, and that by having a more dynamic pupil role where you've got a number of young people from different backgrounds, you create much more interesting, vibrant school communities, and ultimately that's what all school leaders are seeking to achieve.
Absolutely. I think this is a slightly more recent trend, isn't it? I think it's akin to that transition from a slightly old school way of thinking about public benefit to a much more partnership based approach, and thinking about actually this benefits our school communities as well, for pupils, fee-paying pupils, to be educated in a much more diverse environment. And there's now increasing evidence, isn't there, around diversity within classrooms, especially cognitive diversity, where you've got different viewpoints, different backgrounds that people are contributing to the classroom discussions from, actually massively improves the quality of the education. And maybe excellent education now has to be diverse to be excellent.
Yeah, and we see that every day, with powerful examples on a daily basis of SpringBoarders who make such an impact on their school community. We're always proud of all SpringBoarders, but particularly those that get to the point where within only a year becoming elected as head boy or head girl. We've had an example of a boy called Uriel who went to Millfield, and within a year, as I say, elected to become head boy because he had such an effect on his peers who saw him as somebody who was very different, had very different life experiences to them to date, but was kind of calling that out and making them think differently. Or Amara, who's just finished at Sherborne Girls as head girl there, she really helped the community to understand how lucky many of those in those communities are. And we see that every day with SpringBoarders playing both a role in which the school says the SpringBoarders have undoubtedly gained so much from the experience, but school leaders saying, actually, we've gained as much by having Uriel and Amara in our schools as we think they've gained from having the experience to be here.
And I think that's really important, because from a fundraising perspective, knowing that slightly old school assumption that parents like to give to capital projects and alumni like to give to bursaries, that's completely kind of falling away, because I think parents are increasingly understanding these benefits and understanding that there is a moral reason why we should be doing this, and that's important too, but it is also helping everybody uplift the quality of the education, as well as doing a really important thing for social mobility within the country as well.
Yeah. And I think that's crucial for the sector's relevance in an evolving world. Our ability to work together to say we are making strides towards becoming more accessible, and we're doing so in a way that's really targeting those access efforts at those who really most need access to those opportunities. I think it's going to be crucial as the sector evolves and retains its relevance in the future.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And within your work, I know that you're also looking in some cases for some of the children that you help are those who are in care or in really quite vulnerable situations. What additional support do you put in place for those people those young people, those children who have really come from a difficult place?
So of those 1,000 SpringBoarders to date, they have all been typified by facing really immediate risks, whether that's because they live in a place which is really hard to live in, and that would be perhaps because of rates of child poverty or lack of access to a good or outstanding state school that they could commute to, or knife and drug crime. But also around half of those 1,000 have been young people who've got significant social care experience. So that's whether they've got a social worker or they're in foster care or kinship arrangements. And for those young people who've got that very vulnerable earlier years experience, they can, yes, of course, present with some really complicated trauma that adverse childhood experiences we all know that they need to process. But the short answer to your question, Julia, is that we know that so many independent and boarding schools have real excellence in pastoral care, and that actually the adjustments are really minimal because they are already places that are kind, compassionate, caring, and have more. They have smaller class sizes, and they have the ability to have tailored tutor time. It can make all the difference to building trusted relationships, which is what young people from vulnerable backgrounds really need. I mean, saying that, we do, of course, work with each school to put in place scaffolding around each young person to make sure that they are ready for the opportunity, and much of that starts before they start. So we work in about an 18-month lead-in time with the young person to make sure their transition is really carefully managed, and that the school is ready for any additional requirements they might have on the pastoral or psychological support side. But what we need to remember is these schools are fantastic places, and if fee-paying parents choose them because of the quality of their pastoral care, then where we argue and campaign for in government circles is that should be accessible to those of the young people in the UK who face some of the most complicated earlier years experiences.
I'm so pleased to hear you say that, because I think that it's almost an easy excuse for independent schools to sometimes use, and I'm hearing this less now than I was historically, but to say, well, actually these young people's needs so much more care than we're able to provide. And I think actually the conversations that I'm having with schools who have both from RNCSF pupils as well as from their own bursary programs is showing that actually it's not necessarily an increased level of pastoral support that's needed for these children. It's the same as they're providing for the rest of their pupils. So I think actually that assumption or stereotype that the people are using as an excuse not to provide more bursaries actually falls away when you actually look at the case studies or even at the data.
Yeah, that's right. And again, it comes back to our earlier point, that's where the impact data is so important, that we're now able to demonstrate not only that the young people are thriving and are gaining great academic outcomes, but actually that the schools themselves are saying that the real value of having those young people in that community. Many of our SpringBoard participating schools say that SpringBoarders have brought a degree of pastoral care that made them think twice. So we work very closely with a school called Beeds down on the west of Sussex, in Sussex, on the Sussex coast. And their head teacher says, actually, Ali, the training that we put in place to ensure that we're really ready for looking after our care experienced young people has made our staff say they're better at their jobs for looking after all our children. And that's a really powerful thing that bursary schemes can bring.
Absolutely. And again, an example of kind of uplifting the whole sector through these partnerships that we're forging. So we've had a pretty tough couple of years. We're coming through the pandemic, obviously Ukraine now really forefront in our minds. Are there big trends that you're seeing, either positive or negative, that have been perhaps enhanced because of the COVID situation that you're now really acutely finding are affecting what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about some already, haven't we? So, I mean, genuinely, that we've seen a really, really marked trend towards schools seeking ways to open access and build that diversity in their pupil role. And in a real sea change in a sense of the importance of that diversity in creating interesting communities. And I think COVID has almost accelerated this, the school leaders feeling palpably a sense of responsibility to play their part in bridging the educational divide that became so apparent in the last few years. But, we're obviously also conscious of the pressures where schools are only as good as their ability to recruit parents and pupils. And we know that there are real challenges for many schools in maintaining healthy operating surpluses. We know that the economic downturn that's to come is going to make that even more challenging for many schools, but also that there are cultural changes in the UK that have seen, for example, quite a marked decrease in the number of full boarding places, parents no longer choosing full boarding as an option for their young people. So we're conscious that will have an effect on the number of places that might become available for young people that we work with. And you've talked about Ukraine, and we talk often also about other refugees. So unaccompanied asylum-seeking minors are an area of work that we've built up some expertise in. We have supported young people from Afghanistan in years past, and we think we'll see an increase in the number of young people from Ukraine that we will want to support to attend both boarding and independent day schools. I mean, these are all trends that both offer us opportunities as well as challenges for the future. But we're all optimists in my team, and at our core, I think we feel very optimistic about that sea change in the sense of the sector's responsibilities, that we'll see bursaries remaining incredibly relevant and growing in years to come.
Yeah, I think it's some of them are challenges and some of them are positive trends, but they're all knitted together, aren't they? So there's this sense that COVID has simultaneously made the educational attainment gaps, which were there before, much more obvious and more marked than they had been, which increases people's awareness and wanting to look at bursaries as a way of helping society. And I think that impacts on the school leaders and on the donors to feel that this is something that's important. And yet COVID has also made school finances much more trickier. So it's all a complex web together, isn't it? But I think it's wonderful to hear that you're optimistic, and I share your optimism. So what are CSF's plans for the future? You mentioned kind of transitioning into more day school offerings. Tell us a little bit more about that, and how you're adapting, especially the finding pupils, because I imagine that finding the right pupils for day schools is a slightly less centralized process, as a slightly more localized activity.
I mean, our plans for the future, we have a vision that by 2025 we will have seen more than 2,000 young lives transformed through the power of bursary education, and we are on track to achieve that. I mean, it will always require us to build more schools, and school engagement is my number one priority. So, as I say, today we've got 140 schools. 125 of those are boarding schools, and we've got 15 day schools who will embark on taking their first SpringBoard this September. That program at the moment is very focused on children who have got care experience. Mm-hmm. So we have been funded by the Department for Education to build a blueprint for the scalable and routine use of the independent sector to improve outcomes for children in care. And that, therefore, the referral routes actually for us have just been an extension of what we do already in the boarding sector, where every year local authorities were referring care experienced young people to us who actually wouldn't have been right for boarding for a variety of reasons, but for whom actually access to an independent day school would make all the difference to their life chances. And we talked to local authorities about the benefits of, for example, that longer school day, that dedicated tutor time, those smaller class sizes. And actually the thing that makes the biggest difference to referrals from local authorities is access to the co-curricular on site. And care experienced young people, whether in foster care or kinship care, or whether because they've got their birth parent isn't very well, what they are not able to do is access anything outside of school. So they don't get driven off to all of the extraordinary benefits that we know can come from that creative education or from sports and other things. And so what we've seen actually is local authorities really, really eager to access independent school opportunities for some of those care experienced young people. All of the 20 young people starting in 15 schools this September under that day school placement program are what's called formerly looked after children. So they're children who are in foster care arrangements or kinship care arrangements. And in years to come, we are really confident that there'll be a significant uplift in both interest from local authorities to refer young people and from schools to set aside places for that very vulnerable cohort of young people. And I think we are right to focus on that cohort for now, because if it is the case, which it is, that looked after children are given priority access to their local state schools, then it's nigh on impossible to construct an argument that they shouldn't be given priority access to whatever is the right educational pathway for them, whether it's boarding or day, whether it's state or independent. And this government is really interested in the role the sector can play in that really intractable, complicated social problem.
That makes complete sense. And I think it's fantastic that it also opens up some of the schools that maybe aren't boarding schools and were interested in working with yourselves previously, but it just wasn't open. So hopefully you'll find more and more schools stepping forward, able to offer day places.
Great. Yes, exactly. That's our hope.
Excellent. And fascinating to know that school engagement is your priority. That shows kind of a strategic approach to the fact that's the area that unlocks potential growth in terms of the number of people that you're helping.
Absolutely. We exist only because of the school's commitment and care to our endeavour, to the financial commitment, but also to the commitment on adjusting those pastoral systems to make sure that they are ready, and to the teachers in those schools who do such an extraordinary job of being the trusted adults that some of the young people that we work with just don't have in their home environments.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other big trends in the sector that we're seeing is alongside bursaries, or in some cases for some schools instead of bursaries, schools really focusing in on partnerships work with state schools. Is there a future model that you consider whereby actually you're able to help some of these looked after children or care experienced children in a way of helping them to access schools programs that aren't actually a place at an independent school, or is that not an area that you're focusing on?
That's a very good question. That is an area that we are starting to focus on. So
Okay.
in the last 2 years, we've developed a small pilot strand of our work, which is called SpringBoard. And it's to support schools seeking to target their partnership activities for looked after children. And we did so partly because the Department for Education have asked us to do so and have commissioned that pilot. And the pilot has worked in the area of online mentoring. That was a practical approach because we were asked to start it at the outset of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And what's happened in that 2-year period is we've built up a group of more than 300 independent school teachers trained in the specific issues affecting care experienced young people to offer as mentors for care leavers who are hoping to go to university. So one of the sad facts of the current situation is that fewer than 700 looked after children will enter university in any 1 year. So it's a tiny proportion of young people who've been in care.
Wow.
And there are multiple drivers for that. But in part, they lack the information and encouragement, obviously, of a birth parent. And what we know is that the independent sector we have in our independent sector a huge asset of teachers who know exactly how to navigate university preparation and access. And so we've matched 100 looked after children, just shy of 100 looked after children, to a university preparation mentor. And that's a relationship that they will have for 2 or 3 years to navigate everything from A-level choice through to their first year at university. As a pilot scheme, we're obviously in our very early days, but what it has shown us is that we could have a really important role to play in building that sense of a collective effort by the independent sector to target its partnership activities for some of the UK's most marginalised young people.
That's superb. And I think it also potentially adds an element of encouraging both independent schools and some of the young people that you're working with to break down some barriers and lose some of those false assumptions that surround this work, and then potentially take the next step towards actually the schools, for example, then offering day places because they've done some work with these young people. They understand, they get kind of the personal impact stories of the work that they're doing having real benefit. And I can see that actually being a nice feeder into the rest of the work that you're doing to grow the number of places that you're able to support.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Juliet. So it's a very strategic choice on our part. There's really strong alignment between SpringBoard, the bursary element, and SpringForward, the partnership element. And it builds on some really successful work to date in schools like Berkhamsted, who've been doing this for many years, where they have really interesting partnerships with the local authorities to support care leavers or care experienced young people in their area with access to facilities and teaching and learning. And also, in addition, a priority access for those young people to their bursary places. But the two things can sit very happily side by side and support each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's fantastic to hear is the way that you're marrying the funding from government and the priorities that government have, the listening to the local partners and the local authorities that you're working with, thinking about what's right for these individual young people and the school sector. You play a very important role at the centre of all those conversations, and to know there's an organisation such as RNCSF that can coordinate strategically a strategy for how you can move forward must be really exciting. Yeah,
I feel very fortunate to be leading a charity at a time when many charities are actually really struggling in terms of their funding base, but also in terms of their reasons for being. We feel incredibly relevant. We feel very fortunate to have, as I say, 140 schools deeply committed to our work, and we know there's real growth there. There are over 1,000 independent schools in the UK, and we would like to work with very many more of them in the years to come.
Fantastic, absolutely. And let's hope that the funding is there to achieve that. So I know you do some fundraising yourselves, but it's largely the schools that are fundraising or using fee income to support these bursaries, I think. Is that right?
That's right, yes. So predominantly schools themselves will fund the entirety of a SpringBoarders bursary opportunity. But there are some schools who we recognise run on much tighter operating margins, and who can argue that a small grant contribution can help to unlock perhaps something from their operating surpluses, and then matched with donor funds from their own development operations. And so those small grant contributions we can give as a charity. We fundraise for a fund every year, which allows us to do so. That fundraising is always, again, sort of number 2 priority in my list of things that keep me awake at night. It's tough. It is a tough fundraising environment. We all know that, and school fundraisers will know that as well as I do. What therefore we do is seek to suggest to schools that actually, if this is a commitment your school leadership has made, then let's work together to try to ensure that we're not becoming too reliant on fundraised income, and that this is embedded within the school strategy as part of, as you say, from parental or fee-paying income, as well as some match contributions from back donors.
Yeah, it's about finding diversity in that income stream to give it strength. And I think as well, touching back on the conversation we had much earlier in this episode, you were talking about the way that you can provide data around the impact to those schools, and that's what's going to really unlock some of that fundraising potential for schools. So to know that they have some case studies, some testimonials, which to begin with may not be from their school, but are from other schools that are like theirs, that have actually really seen the impact that it can have, and that can really unlock some of those major gift conversations that schools need to be having with donors.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I really hope that our impact evidence is helpful for schools looking to gear up their programme, because no one school alone can have the sort of sample size that we've now got, which gives really robust, statistically significant evidence of the power of a bursary education. Yeah. And because we are an accredited schools network that seeks to explain to all donors that actually most SpringBoard participating schools are similar. And so even if this data isn't necessarily about a child that has gone to Berkhamsted, it is about children who are very similar to those that would be going to Berkhamsted in the years to come. Yeah. We also stay in touch with all of our alumni, and we have about 300 or 400 of those young people now through university and beyond, and they can be really powerful ambassadors for that sort of testimonial piece. And we will offer those, and they often do, to go and speak at school fundraising events, or to come and speak to parent bodies about the power of their bursary experience. And as you say, not necessarily in that school, but actually very directly applicable to all schools that want to become involved in our programme.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's using that leverage, isn't it, of the scale that you have to then leverage the impact across the whole sector, which is fantastic. I'll put a link to some of that impact data in the episode notes if people want to dive into that in more detail if they haven't already.
Great. We've got one report due in 2022. So our latest was in 2019. We've had a pause for a couple of years due to the exam data being quite complex to benchmark, but we will be publishing again later this year, and we really hope that evidence will be available to all schools to use in their fundraising endeavours.
Superb. That's going to be incredibly helpful. Absolutely brilliant. Well done. So we've kind of, just to wrap up our conversation, we've talked before about the desire within the sector to be moving in this direction, but I think we've also recognised that many schools face barriers in terms of their financial ability or their ability to source, to find the right people, young people who are going to benefit from their education. So what tips would you have to give a school leader who's looking to have an impact through their bursary programme, but isn't quite sure how to gear it up? They might have one that's small or have not started yet. What tips would you have for them?
And it's quite a segue from our last conversation, isn't it? I mean, to my mind, impact evidence is everything. Use it to get fundraising off the ground. Use it to speak to parents about why you as a school leader think this is really important and valuable to the school community. But also, I suppose, make sure the pastoral care systems are in place. School leaders will all know what those are, but how might they need to be adjusted slightly to ensure that when the bursary award holders arrive, they're given all of the conditions to succeed, and have careful thought put to that. And we can help with that, as can any of the schools within our network. One of the real benefits of being part of our NCSS accredited school network is school leaders being able to access a community of practice of those that have been doing this for very, very many years, the lessons they've learned, the pitfalls they've encountered, the joys that they've also encountered too. So yes, those would be my two big tips. Yeah. Impact evidence, and careful thought to the pastoral care systems and learn from others who've been on this journey for a few years.
Definitely. And that's the great thing about the sector, is they will share their knowledge with each other, because everyone wants to see this kind of activity increase over time. And then finally, to kind of hover back up to the big picture of what we're trying to achieve here. So what are your general thoughts on the role that independent schools as a sector should be playing in enhancing social justice and social mobility? What's the kind of the ethical, moral heart to this whole argument?
We have touched on this already, haven't we? But I think, the school leaders that we encounter all feel palpably a sense of responsibility to make sure that the independent sector retains its relevance in a really challenging world that will be to come and has been in the last few years. And developing a bursary programme that allows that school to make strides towards becoming much more accessible, to ensuring that their pupil role is a diverse and representative of the world that their young people are going to graduate into. And in so doing, to develop powerful role models for future generations. And we know that the young people that we've worked with to date have now becoming teachers and civil servants and doctors and lawyers and campaigners, etc. And if we can harness their power as role models, that will have a profound effect on the landscape of social mobility for the better. And the independent sector will have played a really important part in that.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ali, for your time today. It's been fantastic to have you here with us and to hear more about the work of the RNCSF as well. Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks very much, Juliet.
Thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast, the podcast that helps senior leaders in private schools to think and act more strategically, both because they want to secure the future of their school and because they want to help build a more equal and just world. You can listen in everywhere that podcasts are available. And if you want to catch up on previous episodes or follow any of the links that I've mentioned today, just head over to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/podcast.